Hello, this is Michael Hexter, and welcome to Politics 2100 here on YouTube. So, this episode I'm calling Fascisms Old and New Are Bullying Gone Political and Then Deadly. So, this is a reflection on, or I started thinking about this idea in listening to Emma Vigeland's comments in response to an interview that she and Sam Seder conducted with Will Sommer, who has written a book, I believe, or about. He also reports for the Daily Beast, and he is someone who's written about QAnon and the followers of QAnon. And I'm not necessarily modeling this theory on exactly the content of that interview entirely, but I thought Emma had made some interesting points about the culture of the teasing culture of basically trolls, online trolls, and how basically the roots of the current, let's say, what started out as the alt-right, and then became neo-fascism and glommed itself onto Trump, that culture has a kind of teasing quality to it, when, for instance, people are often say things that they then take back, that they don't mean. In other words, they try to get you going, okay, by saying something and then saying, oh, no, I didn't mean that. Oh, I'm just joking. And so this trivialization of discourse and what you say and so forth and so on is very typical of bullying in a schoolyard or in, workplaces and so forth and so on. I mean, it isn't necessarily bullying in the sense that people, for the purposes of humor, sometimes say things they don't mean, and they make fun of either other people or themselves. So there can be a sort of a lighthearted version of this, or a one that is not systematic and continuous and leads to a dark place, let's say. But you see in this culture of people who, for instance, I think the example Emma gave is one of the shooters in one of the mass shootings said he was non-binary, but there was then no evidence that he was quote unquote non-binary. So he was using language in a way that was teasing and that was, he was in trouble, and in big trouble in a way, but he was so distanced from his own situation, that he claimed to be non-binary. And there are other examples. That's a particularly sort of sharp example of, and actually, in a way, I mean, it didn't really, it was irrelevant to his, I mean, I don't think it would have affected his legal case one way or the other, to say that, but it was a way to kind of make fun of the culture of sort of LGBTQ culture, essentially, and or LBTGQIA culture. In other words, that he was trying to mess with you. He was trying to mess with people by saying that. I mean, it could be true or whatever, but and trying to sort of blur categories and throw up dust in a way that didn't defend himself one way or the other, but it is a kind of in a way a sort of defense to say, look, I defy your categories. I'm not who you think I am. A little bit like the squid or the octopus throwing up dust, or throwing up ink. I'm sorry, and disappearing behind it. But this is also something that is part of bullying. And so it got me thinking, how much is fascism overall a reaction to both being bullied and also becoming the bully? So turning passive into active, or claiming that one is turning passive into active for the sake of, grabbing political power. And this is something that I think is, when I say it, it seems obvious, but I think in this simple form, I'm trying to find a way in which fascism does not correspond to this description. I think it's very descriptive of lots of the different forms of fascism that have emerged since the early 20th century. And so there, and also the sense of victimhood that fascists utilize to justify their aggression, and to say, look, I'm a victim. I'm someone who's, I'm a nation. I represent a nation that's been bullied. I represent a group of people that's been bullied, that's been surrounded by others, and I am lashing out. Okay, now, they may not say I'm lashing out, but they lash out anyway, using the overall justification of being the victims of bullying in some form or another. At the same time, they become bullies. So it's both passive and active at the same time. It's paradoxical. So and I should really do another video that emphasizes the role of paradox and understanding paradox, which is something I wrote a unpublished paper about in graduate school. And I think it's a critical skill that some people have and some people don't, to grapple with and deal with paradoxes. But anyway, fascists are paradoxical in that they are both so swept up in their own victimhood at the same time that they victimize others, and that they seek out others to victimize, and they do victimization of groups that are most vulnerable. In other words, that they're literally looking for vulnerabilities of others. They are like bullies. They are very sensitive to vulnerabilities. So they pick up on things that are either, or not just things, but people who are at the margins, who are on the outside, or people, in the case of the Jews, are both on the outside and on the inside, or imagined to be on the inside. In other words, there's some kind of a sort of a shadowy force of both being people who are always, and this is, related to also paranoia, which is another part of fascism in mobilizing paranoia. And it's very, very important to understand paranoia from a psychological perspective and a mental health perspective, but also a public mental health and also political psychology perspective, because paranoia is one of the key bedrocks and of the fascist political movement and how it operates, and it's stirring paranoia. It's paranoiagenic. But anyway, it also is takes the form of bullying. So it takes the form of picking out groups that are vulnerable and ostracizing them, or victimizing them in other ways, so forth and so on, blaming them for one's ills, for the ills of society, trying to eliminate them. So the eliminationism becomes then a way that the fascist attempts to purge themselves of this quote unquote problem, whatever the problem is, and that often it's an internal problem, that they have problems internally with some issue or whatever, and they are unable to to deal with it. They're not very reflective people. They're not very self-conscious people. They're not very thoughtful people. But anyway, but they have in some ways, and in other ways, but there are leaders of that movement who are actually very perceptive in terms of other people's weaknesses, so that they're able to pick up on those weaknesses. This is one of the towering strengths of Donald Trump, is to pick up on other people's weaknesses and exploit them. Okay. And so that, in some sense, that makes him, of this generation in the United States, a in the context of a fascist movement, the most powerful leader, or the most talented leader, let's say, and potentially most powerful, in that he's able to pick up on other people's vulnerabilities, like he's done with Ron DeSantis most recently, like he did with the GOP field before him, and they are all trembling in their boots because they are, the bullied, and they are, they are afraid of the bullying, the verbal bullying. I mean, and it's very odd because, Trump shows all kinds of vulnerabilities at the same time, but to exploit those vulnerabilities to get at them when we need to take a stance that the Republicans are unwilling to take, or his opponents are often unwilling to take, because it would involve having a non-Republican or an anti-Republican, which is now a far-right party, an anti-Republican platform or basis of one's critique of him, and that would they are also part of a culture of bullying. There's other kinds of bullying that predate Trump that the Republicans did do. This debt ceiling standoff is a form of bullying. So literally, McCarthy bullied Joe Biden to get to the negotiation table, even as the tale is being told that he got the better of the deal, so forth and so on, and McCarthy's in so much trouble because of what he agreed to, but anyway, this use of power to try to humiliate others, and and the lack of, so if we talk about the Democrats a little bit, the Democrats act as sort of bullied people who are unable to locate the weaknesses of the bullies and to expose them and to fight them effectively. And there are many ways to do that, but it involves also exposing, for corporate Democrats certainly, exposing their weaknesses, exposing their own themselves to criticism, and their donors, and there's the donor class. The politics in the United States does not operate in a vacuum, and as particularly with regard to the donor class, to essentially the ruling class of the United States, the billionaire class, and corporate elites who finance most politicians, or create lucrative emoluments for them in various ways. So anyway, that legally, and sometimes illegally, but our system is so fraught, so shot through with bad anti-corruption laws that politicians are just simply being legally bribed. But anyway, so that limits the way in which Democrats can combat bullying and the bullies. They too are also bullying their base to some degree. So they're not only the bullied, but there is bullying directed at other people. I know I'm overusing the word bullying, and you might think it's, I'm over in using it so much and using it in so many ways. I might be draining it of meaning, but what I mean in talking this way, or using it I'm contrasting it with, let's say, rational discourse and rational argument, an argument where you try to reach the best conclusion with your opponents or against your opponents, and you debate things. Bullying is more just pushing out of discourse things that are dangerous. So pushing things out or pushing people down who are supposed to represent the bad things that one is not supposed to talk about, or the quote unquote bad things. So in bullying, there's also actual repression or using the state apparatus to bully people. So there's the police that can act as bullies, and that bully protesters and bully homeless people and bully black people and so forth and so on. So they are, and also other people, people of color, more likely. But anyway, but they've acted as, rather than a legal law enforcement, a law-abiding law enforcement group, they have often acted as a gang that where bullying is normalized. Okay, in a gang. In other words, gangs are built based on a hierarchy of who is the top bully and so forth and so on. And so anyway, now, again, you may think I'm overusing this paradigm, but I think what I'm describing is revealing of the discourse habits of this alt-right group, the trolls, so forth and so on. This kind of the effort to eliminate uncomfortable parts of discourse, eliminate them through both claiming one is victimized at the same time victimizing. So the paradoxical unity, so to speak, or the paradoxical simultaneity or almost simultaneity of feelings of being victimized, but then victimizing others. So, and also this culture of teasing, but not good-natured teasing, not teasing in a way that one is a shared in one is in a shared set of assumptions about discourse, but instead, teasingly attacking and then retreating by saying I didn't mean it, it wasn't serious. But the attack goes in. The verbal attack goes in. So they are not. And this shows in some sense the cowardice of bullies. So there's facing bullies requires bravery. It requires people to be brave. Too few people who are anti-bully and are for good public policy and for good social decorum, or what you could say, or civilized debate and so forth and so on, are not brave, or are not brave enough, and are not facing these issues squarely enough, in my opinion. So anyway, so again, I may need to. This is just sort of my first draft of this idea, but I'm putting it out there, and maybe if you find this enlightening or interesting, please share your thoughts in the comments. Again, it may feel like it's drained in meaning to you, but I'm contrasting. Maybe it's because if it feels drained in meaning to you, maybe you've lost sight of what a non-bullying culture is like, what a culture or a political culture or is based on rational argument, disagreements, strong disagreements, passionate disagreements, anger, sometimes emotional disagreements, but at the same time, a focus on real objects that are ultimately part of our shared world and are things that we take seriously. So, and not necessarily 100% of the time we can have a joke, so forth and so on, but the constant joking, the constant irony epidemic that happened 30, 40 years ago in our culture, so forth and so on, but that has sunk deep in different ways. And anyway, but that has in my opinion, as someone who grew up somewhat prior to that irony epidemic, just barely, I see, or I feel, and I understand, I think, or I have a sense of what a culture could be like, where we have arguments and disagreements that don't require one to ironize or to leave an opening for this culture, this sort of more metastatic culture of trolling, and of ultimately of this of potentially eliminationist. So actual in real world bullying using the power of the state, as is happening in Florida and may happen in other states and may happen in the federal government if fascists take over there again. That will lead to eliminationist policies eventually, or some forms of eliminationism, and certainly a brutalizing and a dumbing down of public discourse. So anyway, maybe I will do another video, or I will do other videos that maybe will touch on this theme, and it might be in a way that you find more inspiring, or whatever it is. In any case, please share your thoughts in the comments below, in the comment section below, and I'll also put a link to the video that where I was inspired by Emma Vigeland's comments to go down this certainly along this line of thinking. I hope it's not considered to be a rabbit hole by you, but anyway. And also, please like the video if it speaks to you or has some interesting thoughts in it. Please subscribe to Politics 2100, and I'll see you in the next video.